Okay. If y'all hadn't been keeping up lately, I'm excuse me. I'm reading out of this volume one book, the story, volume one. We are at part three, and this is stories about Noah and the flood. Um, it states on this page that I'm reading from, it says Genesis 6, 1 through 11 and 9. And we'll go ahead and start with our part three. Part three, story one. We have an illustration. Uh, Painting by Herbert. Ah, it says Rudin. It's a different Herbert. It says Rudin. Rudin. Well, it's spelled Rude. Rudin, so it might be a different one. Or so I think. And this is what the painting looks like. I'm sure that that it might be floating somewhere. I think I think this one is a watercolor instead of an oil paint like the others have been. Okay? The caption for this says, "There was no churches in Enoch's day. Those who loved God built stone altars and their worship. When the men became wicked, they neglected God's altars and forgot and fought with one another." Ah, that explains the little spider web and the little lizard on here. And then in the background, you may not see it, but there's a little war going on in the background. Okay? Part 3. Story 1. Sad Bad Days. While Enoch walked with God, most of Adam's children and grandchildren did not. They walked by themselves and forgot all about him. They became selfish and greedy, quarrelsome and cruel. They began to fight among themselves and kill each other, even as Cain killed Abel. It is hard to understand how such things could happen in such a short time after creation, and such a little way from all the peace and harmony of Eden. Yet it was not uncommon, even today, for boys and girls to come across an unruly right. Wait. Yet it's not uncommon, even today, for boys and girls to be cross and unruly right after church. That's for those that go to church. But this, you got to think, it's 1953, and it's a whole lot different than what it is now. Some can, let's go back to the story. Some can become right little pests just as soon as a nice picnic is over. Ooh, yeah, they would have picnics. Let's go back. It doesn't take long for some to forget kindness and love that they should remember forever. So it was back there in the early days of the world. As people drifted further and further from God, they drifted further and further into sin. Satan, who, in the form of the serpent, had deceived Adam, turn the page, and Eve in the garden, rejoiced at the turn of events. He had schemed to spoil God's plans for for a happy and beautiful world, and now he has succeeded better than he had ever dared to hope. Excuse me for a cough. Having heard God's promise that the seed of a woman should bruise his head, he made up his mind to do nothing, made up his mind that nothing of the sort should happen. The best way to do this, he thought, would be to lead as many as possible of Adam's children to disobey God and do all sorts of things displeasing to him. So he began to tempt them in many ways, and all who were not living close to God fell for his deception. Adam and Eve, having learned the cost of sin from their own sad experience, tried their best to warn their wayward boys and girls of the danger, and persuaded them to follow, yeah, and persuade them to follow the good way, which leadeth into life. Life. Year after year and century after century, they stood against the rising tide of evil, but it was a losing struggle. The wicked became bolder and their ever bolder in their wickedness. More and more openly they mocked Adam's counsel, sneered that he was too old-fashioned to understand young people, and grumbled every time he tried to make them keep good rules. Adam lived to see just once. Adam lived to see his once beautiful, peaceful world inhabited by a host of very sinful people. Just before he died, he heard of Enoch, the man who walked with God, rebuked the ungodly deeds of the murmurers and complainers, walking after their own lust. Weird words. Whew, 1953. Whew. That's about 900 years after creation. 500 years later, things had gotten much worse. But this time was a quarrel and a fighting everywhere. Nobody's life was safe. The Bible said the earth was filled with violence. Now, how sad that it should have been so. God had done so much to make the world a place of beauty, peace, and joy. Now Satan had almost ruined everything. How sorry God must have happened. How sorry God must have been. The Bible said God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repeated, and it re, re repented, repented the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Ooh, still King James. In those few words, we catch a glimpse of the depths of his sorrow. He was thinking of what might have been if only Adam and Eve had not listened to the serpent. If only all the children which loved him walked with him, as Enoch had done. With awful sadness, he said to himself, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and every creepy thing, and the fowl of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. In other words, he's so upset that he's ready to go ahead and destroy everything. And here's another little thing at the bottom. And that's them talking. And notice that he's being angry. And like I said, some of this looks like old movies. Scenes from old movies. Go to the next page. Conditions must have been very terrible indeed for God to say that. How it must have hurt him to think of destroying all his creatures and all the beautiful things he had made in such a little time before. Yet even now his heart of infinite love held back from carrying out so dreadful a judgment, necessary though it was. Perhaps there was still some who would turn back to him if they were given one more chance. If there were but a handful of 2 or 3, he would gladly wait. My spirit shall not always thrive with man, he said, yet his days shall be 120 years. In other words, he would wait that long, 120 years, to see whether any would heed his call to repentance. But now, if such a call was given, everybody must be found to give it. But who? With most of Adam's children following the ways of Satan, who could be trusted with so important of a task? Were there anyone left through whom God could speak his last message of mercy to the doomed world? And of course, another little illustration, I think is a watercolor, down at the bottom. And that was part 3, story 1. And we'll have the next one here in a minute.